The phantom hand. The note arrived without explanation, its fragile corners curling as if it had traveled far. I'd found it wedged under my door late one evening, just as the first whispers of wind rattled the windows of my quiet apartment. A single sentence sprawled across the yellowed paper in spindly handwriting. Old Penrose Manor. Midnight. Come alone. The oddity of it gripped me more than the content. There was something intimate about the scrawl, as though it had been written just for me. Yet the name, Penrose Manor, carried a weight I couldn't place. Maybe I'd heard it in passing, but it didn't matter. By the time the clock struck 11, I was already shrugging on my coat. The town's abandoned quarter lay in shadows, a forgotten piece of history reclaimed by the creeping wild. The air grew colder the closer I got, biting through my scarf as the silhouette of Penrose Manor emerged. Loomed like a relic of another age, its ivy-cloaked walls leaning defiantly against the night. The iron gate swung inward with an aching groan, though no hand had touched it. Each step up the gravel path sounded too loud, echoing in the oppressive silence. The front door, a massive oak slab, seemed to sigh as it opened under the faintest pressure. Inside, the air was damp and cold, smelling of mildew and something metallic, faint and sharp like blood. The entry hall stretched into shadows, lit only by the flicker of a single dying candle on the grand staircase. Its light warped the space, making the cracked walls and dusty floorboards seem alive. A shiver danced up my spine, a primal warning I ignored as I stepped deeper into the house. I called out, though my voice sounded small and brittle. No one answered. Still, there was a presence. I could feel it, heavy and watching, lurking just beyond the edges of sight. My footsteps faltered as I reached the staircase, the candle's flame sputtering as though exhaling a sigh of relief. Then I felt it. A faint pressure on my wrist, light but deliberate. I spun around. Nothing. The sensation lingered like the memory of an embrace, chilling my skin even as my mind screamed at me to leave. Yet I stayed. Some unseen force seemed to anchor me to the house, urging me forward, promising something I couldn't name. The staircase groaned beneath my weight, each step a reluctant creak that seemed to protest my presence. Shadows stretched and twisted along the walls, their shapes unnatural, almost sentient in their movements. I felt the cold touch again, this time on my shoulder, so light it could have been a breeze. But in the stillness of the house, it was unmistakable. My heart pounded as I whirled around. The air behind me was empty, yet the icy sensation lingered. I pressed forward, drawn to a flickering light emanating from a room at the end of the second-floor hallway. The corridor smelled of decay, the wooden floor soft and damp underfoot. The room was a parlor, its once opulent furniture now sagging and covered in dust. A fireplace yawned cold and empty, its mantel adorned with tarnished candelabras and a cracked porcelain clock. The light I'd seen came from a single oil lamp, its flame unnaturally steady, casting long shadows that pooled in the corners of the room. It was there that I felt it most vividly. A hand, unmistakable and freezing, brushing the back of my neck. My skin prickled, the sensation searing itself into my mind. I turned so fast I nearly lost my balance. The room stared back at me, hollow and empty, yet alive with the weight of an unseen presence. "Hello?" My voice cracked as I forced the word into the silence. It vanished as if swallowed whole. Then came the whispers. Faint and indistinct, they hummed at the edge of hearing, slipping between syllables of languages I didn't know. The sound seemed to come from the walls, the floor, the very air itself. My hands trembled as I reached out toward the lamp. The moment my fingers grazed its cold glass surface, The whispers stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with expectation. I backed out of the room, nearly tripping over the uneven floorboards, and the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it again. The grip, firm and unrelenting, around my wrist. I screamed, jerking my arm free, but there was nothing to fight, nothing to see. My skin burned with the cold of the phantom touch, the invisible hand leaving a mark that was deeper than physical. I stumbled through the house, the unseen force growing bolder with each passing moment. In the dining room, I felt a tug at my coat. In the library, icy fingers grazed my face. Each time I turned, there was nothing but the hollow, watchful silence. It was in the study that I found the mirror, and with it, a reflection that wasn't mine. The study was a cramped, musty room at the end of the hallway, lined with shelves of decaying books that reeked of mildew. A writing desk sat at its center, its surface cluttered with papers and an antique oil lamp that flickered faintly. But what drew my attention immediately was the mirror. It was an ornate piece, nearly as tall as I was, with a tarnished gold frame carved into intricate spirals and patterns. The glass was clouded, its surface marred with faint, web-like cracks that fractured my reflection into unsettling fragments. My stomach churned as I stepped closer, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. At first, my warped reflection seemed to mirror my every movement, but then it changed. I froze as the fractured image of me shifted subtly, just enough for my mind to register the wrongness. My reflection's head tilted ever so slightly, though mine had not moved. Its eyes locked onto mine with an intensity I couldn't explain. My breath caught as a shadow rippled behind the glass, faint but distinct. And then I saw it. A pale, translucent hand appeared in the reflection, resting on my shoulder. Its shape was human, but wrong. Its fingers too long, its joints twisted at unnatural angles. I whipped around, expecting to find someone, or something, behind me. There was nothing but the empty study. When I looked back at the mirror, the hand was gone, but the glass was no longer still. It rippled, as if disturbed by an invisible force, and the faint outline of a figure began to form. A woman emerged, her face gaunt and her hollow eyes filled with anguish. Her pale hair framed a visage that seemed simultaneously sorrowful and furious. She mouthed words I couldn't hear, her hands pressed against the inside of the mirror, as though she were trapped behind it. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest as the whispers returned, louder now and sharper. They seemed to emanate from the very air around me, closing in like a suffocating fog. Who are you? My voice trembled, barely audible over the cacophony of disembodied voices. The woman didn't answer, but her reflection twisted and contorted, her face breaking apart as if the mirror were consuming her. Suddenly, the whispers stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. My pulse thundered in my ears as the woman's shape dissolved, leaving only the fractured glass. That's when I noticed the diary on the desk. Its leather cover was cracked and brittle, the pages yellowed and faintly stained. I flipped it open with shaking hands, scanning its cramped writing. It belonged to Amara Penrose, the woman in the mirror. The entries were disjointed and chaotic, chronicling her descent into madness. She wrote of her husband, an occultist obsessed with trapping souls, and of the ritual that had condemned her to the mirror, her spirit bound to it for eternity. My fingers shook as I read the final entry. If only someone could free me. I feel him coming for me again. I cannot endure another century in this prison. Please, if you find this, burn it. Burn the mirror before it's too late. The lamp beside me flickered violently, and the cold hand clamped around my wrist once more. The icy grip dragged me toward the mirror with inhuman strength. My feet skidded across the floor as I struggled against the invisible force, my screams tearing through the suffocating silence. The glass pulsed, glowing faintly as the surface rippled like a pool of dark water. The woman's face reappeared, her eyes wide with desperation. She slammed her hands against the glass, her silent scream vibrating through the air. Behind her, a darker figure began to materialize, a shadow with no discernible features, yet its presence radiated malevolence. The whispers surged again, now a cacophony of overlapping voices. My head throbbed with the pressure as I clawed at my wrist, desperate to break free from the phantom's grip. The diary's words echoed in my mind. Burn the mirror. I lunged for the oil lamp, knocking it over. Its flame guttered, spilling oil onto the desk. The scent of smoke mingled with the metallic tang in the air as the fire licked at the old papers. The heat grew rapidly, filling the room with an orange glow that danced against the walls. But the mirror fought back. The woman in the glass screamed again, her voice piercing through the cacophony at last. "Hurry!" she cried, her voice ragged and desperate. The shadow behind her lunged forward, its tendrils snaking out from the glass. One wrapped around her throat, pulling her back into the dark depths of the mirror, while another lashed out toward me. I grabbed a burning page from the desk, thrusting it against the mirror's frame. The flames caught, racing along the tarnished gold. The glass buckled and cracked, the surface warping as the whispers turned to unearthly wails. The phantom hand on my wrist tightened painfully, as though trying to drag me into the glass. My vision blurred, spots of light dancing in the corners of my eyes as I screamed and threw my weight backward. The mirror shattered. The sound was deafening, like a thunderclap inside the room. Shards of glass exploded outward, and the phantom grip vanished as abruptly as it had come. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, surrounded by the charred remains of the diary and the smoldering debris of the desk. The room was silent again, but the oppressive cold was gone. Yet, as I stared at the broken shards of the mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been left behind. The silence in the study was a mockery of peace. It pressed down on me, suffocating in its stillness. My limbs felt leaden as I staggered to my feet, surrounded by the wreckage of the mirror. The shards lay scattered, each fragment catching the flickering light of the dying flames. Yet, as I stared down, I swore the glass still moved, faint ripples distorting the reflection of the room. A low, guttural noise seeped from the shards, a sound like the groan of shifting earth or a dying breath. My stomach churned as a chill seeped back into the air, the temperature plummeting with unnatural speed. Then I saw it. In the largest fragment of glass, something stirred. It was no longer my reflection. The black void beyond the surface rippled, and from its depths a shape began to form. It was the shadow, no longer confined to the mirror's prison. Its tendrils coiled like smoke, stretching toward me as if testing the limits of its freedom. My heart thundered in my chest. I turned to run, but the study door slammed shut with a force that shook the room. The fire sputtered, its light faltering as the darkness began to creep in. The shadow slithered across the floor, its edges jagged and sharp, moving with predatory intent. A whisper rose from the shards, soft but insistent, like a voice carried on the wind. It wasn't the cacophony I had heard before. It was Amara. "You must leave. Now!" The urgency in her voice galvanized me. I lunged for the door, my fingers fumbling with the knob as the icy presence slithered closer. The air felt alive, charged with static and malice. Behind me, the fragments of the mirror seemed to hum, vibrating with energy that prickled against my skin. The door finally gave way, and I stumbled into the hallway. The house itself seemed to protest my escape, its floorboards groaning and walls shuddering as I ran. Shadows twisted and reached for me from every corner, the wail of the entity growing louder with each step. When I reached the front door, it swung open before I could touch it, as if the house itself was expelling me. The cold night air hit me like a slap, and I didn't stop running until Penrose Manor was nothing but a dark silhouette against the horizon. Yet, even as I fled, I felt it, that cold touch lingering on my wrist, as though something had followed me. Something that wasn't entirely gone.